Imagine the following scene. A woman arrives at work on Monday morning. She smiles at everyone, asks how the weekend went, listens to her colleagues' problems with her ex, helps her boss organize the presentation he forgot to prepare. And yet, at the end of the day, she feels a huge emptiness in her chest. She did. He gave everything, and there was nothing left for her. This happened on Tuesday as well, and on Wednesday, and last year, and the year before last. She is an empath. Feel what others feel before they even open their mouths. He notices the pain hidden behind the forced smile, captures the mood of an entire room before you sit down. And for a long time, almost all her life, she thought it meant only one thing: explaining, mediating, caring, fixing, until the day she stopped. He didn't stop feeling. He didn't stop caring. She stopped explaining. And it was exactly on that day that something strange happened. The people around her began to perceive her in a completely different way, as if she had gained a presence that did not exist before, as if her silence said more than all the words she had ever used. Carl Jung would call this Sophia, the wisdom that doesn't need to prove itself. And what you will discover in this video will completely change the way you understand empathy, silence, and the invisible power of those who have learned to stop justifying themselves. Because there is a stage that very few people reach, a stage in which the empath ceases to be the eternal explainer, the repairer of other people's souls, the one who carries the weight of the world on his back, and becomes something much rarer, someone who simply is. And that's enough. If you've ever felt exhausted from trying to be understood, if you have already explained, justified, detailed, and still it was not understood, if you carry a sensibility that the world insists on calling weakness, this video was made for you. Stay until the end. What comes last is what changes everything. The day I stopped talking was the biggest cry of my life. There is a moment in the life of some people that divides everything into before and after. It's not a noisy moment. There's no dramatic background music. There's no one applauding. There's no big revelation coming from heaven. It is a silent moment, almost imperceptible to outsiders. But inside, it's as if the whole floor has moved around. This moment happens when a person who has spent their entire life trying to be understood decides, once and for all, to stop trying, not out of anger, not out of hurt, but because something inside her finally realized that explaining too much never worked, that the more she talked, the more people seemed to understand the less, that the more she justified, the more it seemed that she needed to justify herself. And that deep down, all that talking, all that energy spent on words, was a very sophisticated way of asking permission to exist. And here comes the question that changes everything. Why would someone need to ask permission to exist? The answer is kept back in childhood, in the first relationships, in the first environments where this person learned that feeling too much was too much, that having an opinion was inconvenient, that crying was an exaggeration, that perceiving things that others did not perceive was oversensitivity, as if sensitivity were a factory defect that needed to be corrected. And then that person learned to speak, to explain, to justify each feeling with impeccable logic, as if feeling needed logic to be valid. She learned that if she could put together a good enough argument, people would finally understand. They would finally accept. They would finally validate what she felt. But this never really happened, because the problem was never the lack of right words. The problem was that she was trying to convince people who weren't willing to understand, and using her own energies to do so, spending what was most precious to her, trying to fill a hole that was not hers. Carl Jung had a concept that explains very well what happens here. When he said that the human psyche has an enormous power to search for wholeness, to become whole, complete itself. And when we spend years trying to mold ourselves to what others expect, trying to be understood by other people's terms, trying to fit into spaces that were made for another way, the psyche starts to charge, not in words, in tiredness, empty, in that feeling that something's wrong, but you can't name what. The exhaustion of the empath is not physical. It is existential. It's the fatigue of having carried for years the responsibility of making other people understand who you are, as if this were his job, as if understanding others is a prerequisite for you to have peace. And there is a day, a specific day, even if you can't remember the exact date, when it breaks. In which the person looks inside and realizes that he can't take it anymore. Not in the sense of giving up on life, but in the sense of giving up that role. To stop being the person who explains, who justifies, who convinces, who tries, who insists. And then something happens that no one warns is going to happen. When you stop explaining, the people around you become uncomfortable because they were used to his availability, with her voice always ready to fill the silence, always ready to soften the mood, always ready to make everyone feel good. When this disappears, it seems that something is missing. And this discomfort of others is usually interpreted as a sign that you made a mistake. But no, you didn't make a mistake. You just stopped diminishing yourself. And the silence that comes after, that silence that seems strange at first, is the first real sound of those who are beginning to respect themselves. To stop talking in this context is not coldness. It is not arrogance. It is not indifference. It is the recognition that your energy is limited and that wasting it trying to convince those who do not want to be convinced is one of the most subtle ways to do harm. It is the beginning of a turning point that Jung would describe as the beginning of the process of individuation, the path back to oneself. A path that almost always begins with a seemingly small gesture, closing one's mouth, breathe, and let the silence speak for you. Because the silence of those who met has a different weight. People feel it, even without understanding why. And that's exactly what we're going to explore now. And why you feel it all, and yet no one really understands you. Have you ever been in a completely ordinary conversation about a completely unimportant subject and suddenly realized that the person in front of you was sad? Not because she said so, not because her face gave it away, but why did you just feel it? Or have you ever arrived in an environment and knew before any word was spoken that something was wrong? That invisible tension that only you seem to pick up, while everyone else continues to talk normally as if nothing happened. This is not imagination. This is not an exaggeration. That's empathy working at a level that most people don't even know exists. And the cruel paradox of living like this is this. Those who feel everything for others are almost never felt back in the same depth. When those who perceive the hidden pain of others almost always carry their own pain without anyone noticing. Those who are always there for everyone often find themselves completely alone when they need someone. This is no coincidence. There is a very clear psychological reason for this to happen. Deep empathy, the kind you carry, isn't simply being nice or caring about people. It's a different way of processing the world. The brain of a highly empathetic person literally works differently. Mirror neurons, which are the structures responsible for making us feel what others feel, are much more active. This means that the pain of the other is not abstract information for you. It's almost a physical experience, almost real. But the world was not built thinking about people like that. The world was built for those who can maintain a certain emotional distance from situations, for those who can hear a problem and not carry the weight of it, for those who can see someone suffering and not suffer together. These people aren't bad, they're just different, and they build the rules of the social game based on their own experience. So the empath grows up in a world that has no vocabulary for what he lives in. There is no room in the conversations for that depth that he carries. And he learns very early on that if he shows how much he feels, he will be seen as exaggerated, unstable, too intense. Here comes the trap. To be accepted, he learns to hide the depth of what he feels. It learns to present a lighter, more palatable, easier to digest version. But at the same time, and this is the central point, he continues to feel everything. Only now inside with no way out, no space, no validation. This is exhausting in a way that has no right word. Jung talked about the importance of integrating opposites within the psyche. And one of the biggest conflicts of the empath is exactly this. He has an enormous capacity to feel, but he lives in a world that values the rational, the practical, the objective much more. He spends his life trying to fit something that doesn't fit and paying a high price for it. And there is one more layer that few talk about. Those who feel a lot for others end up, over time, losing touch with what they themselves feel. Because all the attention goes out, all the emotional radar is pointed at the environment, at people, at the needs of others. And what is inside, one's own desires, one's own limits, one's own pains, is in the background. Sometimes last. It's a frightening paradox. The person most emotionally connected to the world around them may be the most disconnected from themselves. And not being understood, in this context, hurts in a different way. It is not only the common loneliness of those who have not found the right tribe, it's the loneliness of someone who has spent a lifetime offering deep and genuine understanding and has never received it back with the same intensity. But here's what no one tells you. This lack of understanding of the external world doesn't mean you're wrong. It means that you have not yet found the most important level of understanding, your own. Because before anyone from the outside understands you, you need to stop running away from what you feel. Stop minimizing. Stop apologizing for the intensity. And start treating your own depth not as a problem to solve, but as the most valuable thing you have. That's where real change begins. And it doesn't start with the world understanding you better. It starts with you stopping needing the world to understand you for you to be who you are. The shadow that empaths you don't want to see in the mirror. There is a part of you that you never present to anyone. Not because you're dishonest, not because you want to hide something shameful, but because that part, that deeper, rawer, more human layer, never felt safe enough to show it. Because every time she tried to appear, she was judged. It was called an exaggeration. It was called weakness. Once she was silenced with a look or with a word said at the wrong time. And then you learn to keep it, pushing it down, to cover it with kindness, with care, with availability, with everything that the world has approved in you. Carl Jung called this hidden part the shadow, but not in the sense of evil, not in the sense of something demonic or scary. The shadow for Jung is simply everything that we did not integrate, everything that was rejected, repressed, denied, not because it was bad, but because at some point in life we learned that it wasn't accepted. And for those who carry a deep empathy, the shadow has a very specific form, very particular, very different from what most people imagine. Because when we think of sombra, we think of anger, in selfishness, in cruelty. But the shadow of the empath is rarely that. The shadow of the empath is necessity. It is the will. It's the limit. It is the will to say no. It is the fatigue that he does not allow himself to feel. It is legitimate anger that he transforms into understanding even before he ceases to exist. It is the desire to be cared for that he buries because he has learned that his role is to care. It is everything he feels, but does not allow himself to have. And here is the central problem with the shadow. What we do not integrate into ourselves, we project onto others. This is almost a law of Jungian psychology. When a part of us has no place inside us, it begins to show up on the outside, in the people who irritate us, in the situations that upset us, in the patterns that repeat themselves in relationships. An empath who does not recognize his anger will attract angry people. One the empath who does not allow himself to have needs will always relate to people who are extremely needy. The empath who does not give himself the right to rest will live surrounded by people who drain all his energy and will continue to think that the problem is with them, not with the standard that he himself is sustaining. It is not punishment. It's not karma. It's pure psychology. The shadow appears from the outside when it has no space inside. And there is something even more delicate here that needs to be said carefully. The empath is often proud to be the one who cares, who gives, who is always available. And this pride is real. It is genuine. It is not false. But beneath it, far down there, where it's hard to look, there is often a belief that has never been questioned. If I stop giving, well, no one will want me. This belief is the root of many things. It is what makes the person continue to help when they are at the limit. It is what makes you say yes when the whole body is asking no. It is what makes you smile when you are destroyed inside. It is she who sustains the character of the eternal caregiver. Not out of pure love, but out of fear. Afraid that without this role, without this utility, without this constant generosity, What would she be about? Jung said that confronting the shadow is the most profound act of courage that a human being can have, not because the shadow is monstrous, but because it requires looking at yourself without the filters that we have spent our lives building. And for the empath, this confrontation has a specific flavor. It is the moment when he needs to admit that he is also angry, who also has days when he doesn't care about anyone's problems. That sometimes helps out of guilt, not out of love, who sometimes stays because he is afraid of being alone, not because it is the right place, who sometimes silences his own pain, not because he has overcome it, but because he no longer knows how to feel without feeling for others at the same time. Admitting this is not becoming a worse person, it is to become a more whole person, because the shadow you ignore controls you. The shadow you recognize turns into strength, and it's just when he stops running away from that part of him, when he sits in front of the mirror without looking away, that something really starts to change. Not only in relationships, in the way he takes up space, in the firmness with which he speaks, or in the peace he carries even when the surrounding environment is chaotic. This does not happen suddenly. It is not an instant turn of the key. It's a process. Slow, sometimes painful, but completely transformative. And this process has a name, a destination, a stage that very few people reach, and that changes absolutely everything. That's what we're going to talk about now. What is the Sophia internship, and why so few people get there? Sophia is not a method. It's not a technique. It's not a list of habits to apply on Monday morning. Sophia is a state, a way of being, a quality of presence that some people develop after having been through a lot, and having consciously chosen not to embitter what they have been through, but to transform. The word comes from Greek and means wisdom, but not the wisdom of someone who has read a lot, not the wisdom of someone who has accumulated information or has a diploma on the wall. It is the wisdom of those who lived, of those who felt it, of those who went deep into themselves and came back different, quieter, firmer, more present. Jung used this concept, along with that of individuation, to describe what happens when a person actually becomes himself, when she stops living according to the scripts that the world wrote for her and starts to inhabit who she really is, with all that implies, the beautiful parts, the difficult parts, the contradictions, the wounds, the strengths. And for those who carry deep empathy, reaching this stage requires a turn that goes against everything that has been taught, because the empath has been taught that his value is in what he offers, in help, or in listening, on availability. And for years, and sometimes decades, he built his own identity on top of that. To be useful was to be loved. To be present was to be necessary. To care was to belong. Reaching the Sophia stage means dismantling this entire equation. It means truly understanding at the deepest level that your worth doesn't depend on what you do for others, that you don't need to prove yourself, that you don't need to convince anyone that you deserve respect, affection, space, that its presence alone is enough, not as an argument, but as a reality. And this understanding is not enough in the head. It's not something you decide to think about. It arrives after a lot of internal work, after a lot of pain faced head-on, after many times having been silent when before he would have explained himself, after having said no when the old heart would say yes out of fear. It arrives when you stop trying to convince the world and start simply being. Few people get there because the path requires something that most are not willing to do: give up the constructed identity. And that's scary, because even if this identity hurts, it is familiar. It is known. That's what the people around expect. Giving it up seems, at first, like getting lost. But it's quite the opposite. It's finding yourself. In the Sophia stage, the equalizer does not fail to feel. It does not turn into a stone. It does not become cold or distant. It continues with all the depth it has always had. But now that depth is anchored in something. It is rooted. It does not sway in any wind. It is not lost in each person who comes asking for something. He feels and remains whole at the same time. There is a huge difference between reacting and responding. The equalizer who has not yet reached the stage, Sophia, reacts. He feels the pain of the other and automatically throws himself into it. He feels the discomfort of the environment and automatically tries to solve it. He senses someone's expectation and automatically molds himself to it. It is a reflex movement, fast, almost involuntary. The empath who reached the stage, Sophia responds. He feels everything the same way. But between feeling and acting, there is a space, an instant of awareness, a place where he can choose what to do with what he feels, instead of being dragged along by it. This space is where freedom lives, and people notice. This is the most curious of all. Without the person having to say anything, without having to announce a change, without having to explain themselves, the people around them begin to relate to them differently. There is a quality of respect that comes naturally, a perception that this person cannot be manipulated, cannot be drained, cannot be used as an emotional deposit without consequences. Not because it has become harsh, but because it has become whole. And wholeness has a weight that people feel before they understand. Reaching the Sophia stage is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of a completely different way of existing in the world, a way in which you no longer have to fight to be recognized, because you stopped needing recognition to feel valid. And when that happens, the world around you changes. Not because the world has changed, but because you change the way you relate to him. And that's exactly what we're going to see now. How the world reacts when you stop explaining yourself. No one warns you that when you change, the people around you collapse. Not a dramatic collapse necessarily, not a crisis with crying and confrontation, although that sometimes happens. A silent collapse, a disorientation. As if the ground he was used to walking on had moved a few centimeters and no one could tell exactly what changed. But everyone felt that something was no longer the same. And the thing that changed was you. More specifically, you stopped explaining yourself. He stopped justifying each decision. He stopped softening each opinion with 10 caveats before finishing the sentence. He stopped apologizing for existing the way he does. He stopped filling all the silence with words that deep down were just a way to keep everyone comfortable at his expense. And the world doesn't know what to do with it. Because relationships have patterns. Invisible contracts that were never signed, but that everyone fulfills automatically. You have always been the one who explains, the one who gives in, the one who absorbs, the one who adapts. And the people around you, unconsciously or not, have built the way they relate to you based on this pattern. When the pattern changes, the contract breaks. And then each person reacts in a different way. Some get angry, not an open anger, with a clear argument and a named motive. Anger disguised as worry. Are you okay? You've changed. You're different. As if different were synonymous with wrong. As if the previous version of you, the one that folded, the one that gave in the one that never said no, was the healthy version, and this new space-taking version was the problem. Others disappear. They simply disappear without warning. And that hurts, especially in the beginning. But over time, you understand that these people weren't connected to you. They were connected to what you offered, to your infinite availability, to your comfortable silence, to his inability to disappoint. When you stop offering this, you no longer have anything to hold them back. And there are those who stay, who approach differently, who start to look at you with a respect that wasn't there before. Not because you have become more important, but because you stop behaving like you were less. This is the most powerful and most unexpected effect of stopping explaining yourself. There is a concept in social psychology called perceived reciprocity. Simply put, people tend to treat others the way others treat themselves. When you constantly put yourself last, the world learns that this is the place you occupy. When you start putting yourself as a priority, not with arrogance, not with disregard for others, but with genuine respect for yourself, the world recalibrates. It takes a while, but it recalibrates. The silence that once seemed empty now feels heavy. Not the weight of uncomfortable silence of those who have nothing to say, the weight of silence of those who have a lot to say and choose not to waste it on those who are not ready to receive. People feel that. Before understanding, they feel. It has another effect that is worth mentioning because it is subtle but very real. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop inviting others to judge. Every time you justified a decision of yours without anyone asking, you were essentially saying, please evaluate if this is right. And people evaluated. And sometimes they disagreed. And then you found yourself defending something that was yours, that didn't need any defense, within a debate that you yourself created unintentionally. When you stop explaining, this cycle stops. You make a decision. Period. Whoever needs to understand will ask. And you can answer if you want, in the way you want, at the time you want. This change seems small in theory. In practice, it is huge because it changes the power dynamics of relationships, not in the sense of domination, but in the sense of balance. You stop being always in debt, always needing to prove, always running after approval, and start occupying the space of those who simply are, present, whole, available when you want, unavailable when you need it, no drama in either case. And the relationships that survive this change, the ones that stay after the filter has passed, are completely different from the previous ones. More honest, lighter, more real. Because now it is relationships between people that are truly chosen. Don't come between someone who needs to be accepted and someone who accepts because you never give them a hard time. This is the gift that comes from the other side of the process. But to get there, you have to cross. And crossing has a path. It has a step-by-step. Not a rigid script, because no one is the same, but a direction, a compass. And that's what closes this video. The way back to yourself. No guilt and no rush. No one gets here by chance. If you've made it to this point in the video, it's because something in what was said touched something you already felt but couldn't name. And that in itself is an important sign. It means that some part of you is ready to look more honestly inside, and that's rarer than it seems. But now comes the part that no one likes to hear. The way back to oneself has no shortcut. There is no technique that can do in 3 days what takes months of awareness. There is no list of affirmations that replaces the real work of sitting with discomfort and learning not to run away from it. There is no guru, method, or podcast that will do for you what only you can do. What exists is a direction, and it is about it that it is worth talking. The first movement is to learn to distinguish what is yours from what belongs to others. It sounds simple. The empath has spent so much time absorbing the emotional state of the people around him that he often genuinely no longer knows what he feels on his own and what he is feeling in echo from someone next to him. This distinction is fundamental, and it starts with a very basic practice. Before acting, ask, is what I'm feeling now mine, or am I carrying something that doesn't belong to me? It is not a question to be answered clearly every time. Sometimes the answer doesn't come. But the simple act of asking creates a space between feeling and reacting. And it is in this space that autonomy begins. The second movement is to relearn how to feel anger without punishing yourself for it. Anger has a terrible reputation. One, it was taught as synonymous with rudeness, lack of control, immaturity. But anger, within a healthy psychology, is information. It is the sign that a boundary has been crossed, that something is not right, that you are being treated in a way that does not match who you are. The empath who has learned to swallow anger has lost access to one of the most important instruments of internal guidance that exists. Regaining that access doesn't mean blowing up anyone for any reason. It means learning to listen to what anger is saying and acting on it with awareness. The third move is the hardest, letting people disappoint you without you taking responsibility for their disappointment. This is the central node of the life of those who have deep empathy. The enormous difficulty of seeing someone disappointed and not feeling that it is your obligation to fix it, that it's your fault, that you should have done it differently. But there is a truth that Jung articulated in different ways throughout his work. Each person is responsible for his or her own psychic life. You can't and shouldn't carry other people's emotional responsibility. This is not abandonment, it's respect. It is treating the other as an adult capable of dealing with their own feelings. And treat yourself as someone who does not have to pay for the well-being of others with your own peace. The fourth movement is to create real silence. Not the silence that comes because you have been speechless, the chosen silence. The silence that you practice because you have understood that within it there is information that the noise of the world does not allow you to hear. The empath who never stops, who is always available, always responding, always there for everyone, never hears his own voice. And over time, he doesn't even know what it sounds like anymore. The chosen silence is where you reconnect, where you remember who you are when you are not being what others need you to be. It can be 10 minutes a day. It can be a walk without a headset. It can be simply sitting and doing nothing and letting what comes up without immediately trying to solve or analyze. The fifth move, and perhaps the most liberating of all, is to stop waiting for the people who have hurt you to acknowledge what they did. This wait is one of the most common arrests of the empath. Wait, the expectation that one day the person will understand, he will apologize. You will recognize it. It will validate the pain it caused. And as long as this expectation exists, the person remains imprisoned. He continues to wait for something that may never come. It continues to give power to those who no longer deserve to have any power over their peace. To release this expectation is not to forgive in the religious and grandiose sense of the word. It is simply to stop organizing your own life around something that does not depend on you. It's taking back control of the only space where you have real control, your own interior. The path back to oneself is made up of many of these movements. Small, repeated, imperfect, with relapse, with days when you accidentally go back to the old pattern and catch yourself there, and do it differently next time. There is no finish line with a trophy. There's a growing sense that you're occupying a space that has always been yours, and that for too long you've left empty for others to fit in. Sophia is not a destination. It is a choice that is renewed every day, and it starts now, at this very moment, with you here, having made it to the end, which already says a lot about who you are and what you are willing to build. The world notices when someone stops losing themselves in others and begins to find themselves. You don't need to advertise, you don't need to explain, you just need to get started.